The cold woke him. Metal pressed hard against his spine, draining warmth. His wrists and ankles burned from the straps biting into his skin. When Michael opened his eyes, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered in harsh bursts, casting eerie shadows across the small, sterile room. The chair came into focus first. Thick leather restraints bound his arms and legs. Heavy coils of wire snaked across the floor, connecting to the hulking frame of the device he was strapped into. An electric chair. He froze, breath hitching in his throat.
"This isn't right,"
he whispered. Beyond a thick pane of glass, dark figures sat in shadowed seats, their faces obscured. At the center, a man leaned forward toward a microphone.
"Michael Foster, you have been sentenced to death for the murder of Anna Grace Delaney. Do you have any final words before the sentence is carried out?"
Michael's pulse hammered in his ears.
"Murder?
His voice cracked.
No. I didn't kill anyone. You've got the wrong guy."
But even as he spoke, something in the back of his mind shifted, a whisper, faint but sharp, clawing at the edges of his thoughts. Blood, a scream, a flash of silver. Michael shook his head violently.
"I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even know who that is."
The shadows beyond the glass didn't react. The man at the microphone adjusted his papers.
"You've maintained your innocence from the beginning,"
he said flatly, his voice tinged with exhaustion.
"but the evidence speaks for itself."
Michael's jaw tightened as the words echoed in his head. The trial, the accusations, it all came flooding back in fragmented pieces. They'd found his fingerprints on the knife, his DNA under her fingernails. Neighbors had reported hearing his voice, yelling her name the night she died. And still, Michael couldn't remember any of it. In court, he'd begged them to believe him.
"I don't know what happened. If you would just hold on a minute, please."
The prosecutor had labeled him a liar. The press had branded him a monster. But Michael had only one question echoing in his mind every day since his arrest. Did I really do this? The guards entered the room, checking the restraints and attaching electrodes to his shaved scalp. Michael flinched at their cold, indifferent touches. Then the voice came again.
"Well, this is awkward."
Michael's breath hitched, his eyes darting around the room. The guards didn't react.
"Confused, huh?
The voice chuckled softly.
Guess you always were the slow one."
"No,
Michael muttered under his breath.
not real. This isn't real."
"Oh, I'm real?
The voice replied smoothly.
And you know it?"
Michael squeezed his eyes shut, trying to drown out the sound. But the voice grew louder, more insistent.
"You're going to sit there and play the victim? You don't remember because you didn't want to remember. But I do."
Images flashed in his mind. Anna's apartment, her wide, terrified eyes, the knife in his hand.
"No,
Michael gasped.
that wasn't me. I wouldn't do that."
"But you did."
The voice said with a grin Michael could almost feel.
"We did."
Michael's memory of the trial came in disjointed pieces, like watching a cracked mirror fall apart. He remembered his lawyer's frustration.
"You can't just say you don't remember, Michael. That's not a defense."
The prosecutor had hammered him relentlessly.
"You expect us to believe you blacked out and conveniently forgot stabbing a young woman 27 times?
There had been moments when even Michael felt like an observer in his own trial. His pleas of "I don't remember" had only fueled the narrative that he was lying. The courtroom was packed with people who wanted to see justice served, but they'd never understand the gaping void in his memory that left him as much a stranger to the crime as they were. The defense had pushed for a psychological evaluation, hoping to prove diminished capacity, but the state psychologist had dismantled their argument piece by piece.
Mr. Foster's records show no prior history of mental illness.
The expert had stated, her voice calm and clinical.
His personality assessments reveal a rational, functioning individual. While he claims memory lapses, there is no evidence to suggest he lacks awareness of his actions. In my professional opinion, Mr. Foster was of sound mind when he committed this crime.
Those words had sealed his fate. Michael, sitting there in the courtroom, had felt the faint stirrings of something darker within him, a presence lurking just beneath the surface, watching, waiting. He hadn't wanted to admit it, but part of him had always known. The blackouts, the sudden shifts in his mood, the strange gaps in his memory. He wasn't alone in his own mind. The voice in his head grew quiet as the guard stepped back. For a moment, Michael thought he was alone again. Then it spoke, soft and mocking.
Not much of a fighter, are you? All this time I've been cleaning up your messes, doing the hard work while you cowered like a child.
You killed her.
Michael whispered, tears streaming down his face.
You ruined my life.
Our life.
The voice corrected.
But don't worry, I'll let you take the credit. After all, isn't that what you wanted? To feel innocent?
Michael screamed, straining against the straps.
Why are you doing this?
The voice laughed.
That's what you want, not me.
Michael's chest heaved as the reality of his situation crashed over him. The straps dug into his wrists, a biting reminder of his helplessness. He pulled against them, knowing it was futile, but the primal need to fight, to escape, consumed him. The cold of the chair seeped into his bones, a stark contrast to the sweat dripping down his temple. The room was silent now, save for the soft hum of the machine, ominous and steady, like a countdown to his end. Beyond the glass, the shadowed observers remained motionless, their faces obscured but their judgment palpable. His gaze darted to the wires snaking across the floor, to the polished metallic sheen of the electrodes pressed against his scalp. His breath hitched. This is it.
Please. You don't understand. I didn't do it.
His voice cracked, raw with desperation, but his words felt hollow, even to himself. The voice returned, soft and taunting.
You're wasting your breath.
Michael froze. The voice was closer now, behind him, beneath him, all around him.
I didn't kill her. I wouldn't.
Michael whispered, shaking his head. His tears fell freely now, streaking down his face.
But you did. And now you'll pay for it.
Michael's heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. His throat was dry, his voice barely a rasp.
Why won't you stop? Why won't you leave me alone?
Because I am you.
The words sank like lead in his chest, and Michael knew then that this was the ultimate betrayal. Not just by the voice, but by his own mind, by the parts of him he couldn't control, couldn't even face. As the guards waited for the technicians' final preparations, 2 guards stood near the door, speaking in hushed tones, just out of earshot.
He's completely gone.
One muttered, shaking his head.
Argues with himself nonstop, especially these last few days.
The other guard glanced toward Michael and shrugged.
Doesn't matter now. He'll be quiet soon enough.
One guard approached and placed a hand on his shoulder, not out of comfort but as part of the protocol, checking the harness and equipment. The voice quieted as the moments ticked down. Michael squeezed his eyes shut, clinging to the hope that he'd wake up, that this was all some elaborate nightmare. But the cold metal against his skin, the faint scent of ozone in the air, all of it told him otherwise. Michael's lips parted, a choked sob escaping. He wanted to scream, to beg, but the weight of fear pressed against his chest like a boulder. The hum of the machine grew louder. A single tear slipped from the corner of his eye as his thoughts spiraled into chaos. He wasn't ready. A violent jolt seized Michael's body, snapping his muscles taut as if he were a puppet on frayed strings. The metallic tang of ozone filled the room, sharp and biting, as his body convulsed against the restraints. A sound, half-choked scream, half-guttural gasp, escaped his lips before the current silenced him. The acrid scent of burning flesh followed, curling into the sterile air, while the chair groaned under the force of his thrashing. And then, as quickly as it began, the room fell deathly still. Michael was gone.